Okay, so Jeremy, why don't you just start out by introducing yourself?
Yeah, no problem. I'm Police Constable Jeremy Burns. I work for the Toronto Police Service. I'm our Military Veterans Wellness Program Coordinator at the moment, and I work at Community Partnerships and Engagement Unit out of Yorkdale Mall.
Okay, let's just pause there for a second. You're at
Sure.
Yorkdale Mall right now. We had a whole conversation about this before this conversation. There's like thousands of people that go through Yorkdale Mall every day. I couldn't
Right.
figure out where you guys were in the mall. So just situate us even further. It's not like you're next to the Zara store or something, right?
Right. So the office is in the office tower here is very close to where the TTC subway is,
Mm.
nearby to the Tim Hortons and the Starbucks. And there's a source. I think there's a source down there, right up from the OVO store. Most people would probably understand where that is.
I don't, but I'm not as hip as most people are, Jeremy. Okay, so let's get going. Let's just point out first, though, you are here to talk about your experience and you have such a story to tell, but you wanted to make sure that we stressed that. So this is the Jeremy Burns story, and I'm so honored that you are sharing it with me today. And if you'd like to elaborate on that as we get going, you can. But one of the things you mentioned in our pre-interview conversation was that you were one of the fortunate ones where you always knew sort of what your path was going to look like. So just tell us a little bit about that path.
Yeah. Again, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here talking about this. I grew up in Whitby. I grew up in Durham Region, and I come from a long line of military and police in my family. It runs through my family. A lot of my members of my family have served, and so I grew up with stories of my grandfather and all of his brothers and sisters serving in the military. My great grandfather served overseas,
Mm.
um, and so I kind of grew up around that type of conversation. You know, talking about what honor meant was not uncommon even at a younger age. My grandfather really wanted to instill those traditional values in me and highlighted the importance of serving. I mean, as a little kid, I probably really didn't understand fully what that all meant, but I was kind of locked onto every word he said, and I always felt different. I always felt like, um, there was, I always felt dissatisfied with the jobs that I was working, with the life that I was living. I didn't feel like I was doing enough. I always felt
Mm.
dissatisfied with that. Um,
Do you remember some of the words that your grandfather shared when you were a child, even if you didn't really understand them at the time, about what honor meant?
yeah, he just really said to me, there's people who need help in the world. There's people who can't help themselves, and it's a really important thing that if you have an opportunity to help somebody in that situation, then you take it, and
Mm.
you don't waste that opportunity to help somebody else, because you know in the grand scheme of the world and how things work, you're not the most important person walking around, and there's sometimes peace to be found, in helping other people. I'm sure
Mm.
he may not have used those exact words, because I was pretty little when we started having these types of conversations, but I just know that that was very something that was very important to him, and he tried to instill those values into me. Um, so I grew up around Durham Region. When I finished school, I went to college. I took a law enforcement program in college for 3 years.
Mm.
And after I graduated, I always knew that I wanted to join the military. I floundered for a few years, just, not really focused, not really disciplined.
How
It's a
old were you?
very,
Like, we're talking in your early 20s at this point?
yeah, in my early 20s.
Mm.
I joined the cadets when I was a little kid, and I got a little bit of a taste for it, but I didn't stick around. I think I wasn't in the right headspace
Mm.
for that organization. But it did give me a little bit of a sample of what life might be like in the military, or some of the skills that you learn. Um, After college, like when I was in high school and 9/11 happened, I was so angry. I was so angry about everything that had gone down, and I felt so helpless.
Mm.
And when I saw that we were deploying troops to go to Afghanistan, that was it for me. I was like, okay, well, I've always thought about doing this, but now's the time. Like now I have to start working towards that. I still didn't quite get there. I didn't join until I was 24.
Mm,
But I spent the time, preparing myself as much as I could for that life.
mm,
So I finished college, and when I was 24, I joined the military, and I did my basic training up at Base Borden, and then
mhm,
I was sent to Wainwright, Alberta, for a few months.
mhm.
Um,
Base
after
Borden is
Wainwright,
in Barrie, is that right?
yep, up near
Okay.
Barrie. That's
Yeah.
right. After I left Wainwright, I went to infantry battle school in Shiloh, Manitoba,
Mhm.
and I was there for I think battle school's 12 weeks or 15 weeks. I can't remember now.
Mm.
But it was cold and it was really hard. It was really hard, and I really struggled with my physical fitness. And from there, I was posted to the 1st Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, and I was stationed out in Edmonton, Alberta.
Mm.
What's interesting about my training, like when I joined the military, I did what I could to prepare, but I really wasn't prepared. I
Mm.
I didn't really have the drive or the motivation. I joined. I was 285 pounds. I was very overweight. I had already had bad knees, and I just wasn't in shape. So in a year of training, I went from 285 pounds down to 215, which
Wow.
is quite a bit of weight to lose in a year. And I just through diet and exercise.
Yeah.
I
So,
fluctuated with
so,
my
so just,
weight
but just,
over the
but just tell
years.
me first, because
Mhm.
I'm picturing this big guy
Yeah.
that reminds me of something that you did even before. Cause you touched on how you were putting yourself in roles to sort of prepare for, this path that you were taking. You were a bouncer for a number of years before
Oh
you even
yeah.
got there, right?
Yeah.
Can you just
I
tell
worked
us a
in the
little bit
bar
about that
system.
just before we get too
Yeah.
far away from it? Because I think it's relevant.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Yeah, I started working in the bars when I was 18. I don't the job definitely wasn't what I thought it was going to be.
Mm,
What I found was I suppose I had a niche for talking to people. And I really had that ability, even though I was a big guy. I was always more interested in talking to people than rolling around on the ground with somebody. That wasn't ever really what I cared to do. And inevitably, I mean, I think I did the job off and on for about 12 years,
mm,
at different bars all over the place. And so inevitably I ended up getting into a lot of those types of situations, of physical confrontations. But I mean, I found real value in being able to convince people just to do what I needed them to do,
mhm.
or to stop doing what they were doing that they shouldn't be doing. And that's where I kind of developed the ability to speak to people, and the ability to kind of, almost, I guess, almost put myself in their shoes. So if this person's upset about something in the bar and they're drunk, and they're maybe not thinking rationally, well, if I was in their shoes, how would I be feeling about what happened to them? Well,
Mhm.
I guess I kind of developed a little bit of
Mhm.
that there, but definitely the ability to talk to somebody and
Mm.
convince them, that they need to take it easy, and it plays into all the de-escalation,
Yeah.
the type stuff that we do every day as officers, right?
Yeah.
And I really kind of developed a talent for that. I think I was known as somebody who could convince somebody to do something, and then at the same time convince them it was their idea in the first place. Without, I'm not trying to sound cocky. I really found value in that. And so I really kind of tried to build those skills as much as I
Mhm.
could while I was working in the bars.
Yeah, I love that. What you're saying so much, and not to infantilize these drunk people that are getting into,
Mm.
fisticuffs in the bar or whatever, but you're reminding me of talking to my children, like I have a 4-year-old, 6-year-old, 8-year-old. You got to convince them that that's their idea sometimes. Otherwise, you're not getting out of that.
That's it. I've got
Okay.
two
So
babies of my own, so yeah, I understand.
you
It is
get
very
it.
similar.
How
Yeah.
old are your babies?
3 and 4.
Oh yeah, exactly. Okay. So we're gonna circle back to your bouncing stuff in a little bit. But okay, so you're in training, and tell me more. So you had your weight lost, you got yourself into shape. Where did it go from there?
So once I got to my battalion after battle school, that's when it's just, regular army life, right? So that's the Monday to Friday. 8 to 4 kind of thing, unless you're on a course or you have a duty. That was pretty much your life. Home 6 weeks out of the year. You have summer, 3 weeks in summer, 3 weeks around Christmas time to go home and see your family. But other than that, it's training courses and doing physical training in the morning, getting your workout in, doing low level training during the day. And that was kind of the life for me at the time. I was drinking a lot, but I was I was 24. There was a culture of that in the military. And so I was with a new group of people, new group of friends. It's exciting, and so I definitely got into that life a little bit.
Okay. So then where did it go from there?
So several months after I got to my battalion, we got word that the battalion was being stood up to go to war. So it works on a rotational basis with the full-time infantry units. So the Van Dews were in Afghanistan before us. We relieved them, and then when we were done our tour, we were relieved by the RCRs. So when we got stood up for war, it was a pretty exciting time. I mean, the only things I wanted to do with my life were to be a soldier, a cop, and a father. It's all I wanted. So, I joined with the intention of wanting to go fight in Afghanistan. When I spoke to the recruiter originally, he said, you put down your top 3 choices for what you would like to do in the military. And I put down all combat arms trades, and he said, well, you scored okay on the testing. So, which trade would you think you would be most interested in? I said, which one's most likely to get me to Afghanistan? He said the infantry. But it's really hard. So I said, all right, well, I came here looking for a challenge. I knew it was going to be hard. And so that's why I chose that. So when they stood us up.
And you had already overcome so much as well, like just since joining the military and getting yourself into that level of fitness that you had to be at, like you must have been thinking, if I could do that, then what's another challenge?
Yeah, and it is progressive. I mean, it's a little bit of a culture shock when you first get there. I went from exercising a couple times a week to every single day. You're embedded in that culture. You're embedded in that life, especially on training courses, like in battle school and in basic training. Like there's not a lot of downtime, right? It's go 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 the entire time. So when I got to the battalion and they told us we were being stood up for war, I was so excited. I was like, this is it. This is a huge challenge. I was nervous. But it's like, well, this is why I'm here. This is what I came here to do. And now it actually sounds like I'm going to get the opportunity to do that.
So explain that excitement to us, because some people might look at that the wrong way. You've already told us what you were trained from your grandfather about what honor meant. So you're excited. What exactly are you excited to go to Afghanistan to do?
So the first thing that I was excited about is that I couldn't think of a group of people who needed help more than them. It's hard to explain. It's hard to explain how terrible the Taliban really are to people who have never experienced it. At the time, I hadn't experienced it firsthand, but I had heard enough to know that if there was a group of people who needed us more than the Afghan locals, and I don't know who they are. So I was very excited that I was going to finally have an opportunity to do something I had never done and help somebody who wouldn't be able to help themselves, which played directly into the lessons that I learned from my grandfather when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And that was super important to me to have that opportunity. The other thing was that I kind of talked about this before. I had found my jobs in my life before the military very unfulfilling. I wasn't hitting what I needed to hit. I wasn't doing the things that I needed to do. And going to Afghanistan was the first time in my life that I felt like this is exactly where I should be and exactly what I should be doing with my time. It's being here and fighting. And I was going to have an opportunity to finally do that. So there was definitely that excitement. On a more personal level too, there was a lot of excitement around, I'm going to get a chance to test myself and see if I can do, arguably one of the hardest jobs that you can do. right?
Mhm.
You know, there's not too many people that I knew personally who had been to war, um, just because of the way things had gone. But now I was going to get that opportunity, and I had trained for this. So for people like people who didn't serve in the military, imagine a hockey player in the NHL. They train their whole life, they play their entire life to get to the NHL. And then they work on their skating and they work on their stick handling, and they learn all the plays and they keep themselves in shape and they dedicate their whole life to that.
Mhm.
And then the playoffs happen, and that's their chance to put all those skills and all that time where it's supposed to go. For me, that was the war.
Mhm.
And again, like I don't want to, and we talked about this before, but I don't want to seem like I'm a representative for the veteran community. Like I don't speak for anybody but myself. And I served a short career. I served 3.5 years. I'm not, trying to portray that I was some glorious warfighter or anything like that. But I did my job, and I'm very proud of my service.
Mhm. You told me when we spoke last that you had expectations about war and that some of them came full force and met your expectations and some of them didn't. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
For sure. I was very, I mean, I was like probably most people the first time that they deploy, I was very naive in the sense that I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. But I didn't regret it. So there again, as you said, there was some things that I expected and other things that I didn't expect.
Mm.
I didn't realize how much of a physical toll it would take on my body.
Mm.
I came back like a lot of people do. I came back like pretty broken physically. My back was a mess. My hips were a mess. My ankle was a disaster. Just
Mm.
just because of the wear and tear. It's very rough terrain in Afghanistan, and so I was doing a lot more like climbing and
Mm.
jumping over wadis and
What's a wadi?
navigating. A wadi is like a almost like a small river that goes through the village. So the locals
Okay.
they'll use it to wash their clothing, wash their
Mm.
bodies. It's a toilet.
Mhm.
It's a drinking reservoir.
Mm.
They're pretty filthy. The wadis. So there was a lot of that type of stuff I didn't really expect. And again, even though, like I said, I had lost a bunch of weight, um, I was also I was also partying a lot. So I had gained a little bit of that weight back. I really wasn't in the best shape that I could have been, so, which is probably surprising to a lot of people thinking
Mm.
about going to war. But um, I so there was those expectations that kind of surprised me. We weren't quite as busy as I would have expected. We were there during the winter. The winter
Mhm.
tours are typically a little bit slower as it pertains to um, contact with the enemy.
Mhm.
So I wasn't in any big 14-hour firefights or anything like that. We had some harassing fire. We got into a few engagements. It was a lot of IEDs. It was
Mm.
a lot of explosive devices.
Mm.
Finding them, standing by with the engineers while they blew them up, that type of thing. And I also didn't really expect, um, and this is just, again, me being naive, but I really didn't expect the locals to be quite as standoffish as they were with us.
Mm.
Some of them were very friendly. Some of them were great, and some of them were like wanted nothing to do with us. And I kind of started to realize when I got there like the complexities of the situation and the complexities of being from a foreign country and trying to help people have a better life, but the life that you're trying to help them build is not something that they can really even fathom, is it's so far removed from what they know.
Mm.
And so it sometimes felt like you were kind of wondering, like, are we really making a difference here? Like, is this really kind of moving the needle, or is this just another, is this just a waste of time? But it wasn't a waste of time. It was definitely, I definitely had a few moments where I felt like, okay, all right, we are making a difference. They're small, they're very
Mm.
small moments, but we are making a difference here.
Are you comfortable talking about some of those moments where you felt the impact of making a difference?
Yeah, for sure. So a couple of them that I experienced directly, you know, I I had a little kid come up to me and shake my hand, and he just said banana. He just said thank you in Pashtun, right? And so um like I hadn't had any local say thank you or really very much to me the whole time that I was there, except for this little kid.
Mm.
I'm like, that's interesting. Like, you know, I wasn't expecting anybody to thank me. It's not, I didn't come here for thanks, but the fact that he did it, I think it was at a right time too. It was at a point in the tour when I was starting to feel like a little slogged down with everything. I was worn out. I really didn't know what was going to happen the rest of the tour. And I needed, I think that at that time was really helpful because it kind of restored like, okay, all right, I'm doing the right thing here. You know, like I feel like I'm doing the right thing. Um, the other another situation, I wasn't directly involved with this, and it'll be pretty obvious why in a second. But I have a friend who's our medic, and she told me a couple stories during our tour about you know, like walking by the local women, and they would kind of look around to make sure there was none of us around, and then they would lift their burqa or their veil so that they could say hi, and they would wave to her so she could see them. I also remember going into villages, and this is really awesome. I can remember going into villages on patrol and watching the faces of the little girls when they saw her, you know, and her head is not covered. She's wearing a helmet and she's a soldier. And I can remember them looking at her like she was a superhero.
Oh.
Like they were looking at her like she, like literally mouths hanging open in
Mhm.
total shock because they had never seen somebody who looked like her with blonde hair, who was not afraid, you know, who was a strong person. And it was inspiring and heartbreaking. It
Mm.
was terrible that way. But um those little moments, you know, you try to hold on to those, and they helps to remind you of your why.
Yeah, exactly. Because, well, one question I wanted to ask you, and perhaps you can answer it now, is like, what is that? Like, what impact does it have on you when you're in those moments of why are we even here? You know, like what would it be like for you without those why moments that you just described? Those the thank you and the women lifting their burqas or their veils as your colleague described to you. What is it like when you're there and feeling like, what are we doing here?
I think like I think it, you know, you get numb after a while. You get emotionally numb to the things that are going around because there's death everywhere. There's tragedy everywhere. And you get strangely comfortable with it.
Mhm.
But I think that for your drive and for your own morale, I think it's important to be able to kind of remind yourself of that why. And those moments help you to do that.
Mhm.
Right. And if you don't have those moments, then you just have nothing to replace it. And you remain numb. And then, you know, I don't know, you start to question. I think you start to question, why am I here doing this? Was this a waste of time? Look what I'm sacrificing, and it's not making a difference. So when you see
Mm.
those little moments, it helps to restore the drive. It
Mhm.
helps to restore your faith in what you're doing. And it's far from a perfect science. I know that there's probably people who are going to be listening or watching that disagree, and that's definitely, I definitely understand that as well.
Mhm.
But for me, I needed a few of those moments to see like, okay, this is not a complete waste of time. You
Mhm.
know, the people here really need us.
Mhm. So this was your first tour. How long were you over there?
Uh, 6.5 months,
Okay.
6.5 months, give or take. Yeah. Yeah. So this was my
And you
only
were,
tour.
and how old were you at this time?
I was 25, 26.
Okay, yeah, that's
It
what I
was
was going
October
to.
2009 till May 2010.
Okay, and so then where did your life go from there?
So when I came home from Afghanistan, it was, you know, back to normal, back to Monday to Friday at the base kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, a little bit of low level training, but nothing too intense. Um, and I just found that I was having a really difficult time transitioning back to civilian life. I really just didn't understand what the hell was going on. I felt anxious all the time. And I was drinking all the time. I was, and it's like the first couple weeks, you're excited to be home. So it was no big deal. It wasn't a concern. Everyone's just celebrating. We're happy to be home. We're happy to see our friends and family. But at some point, the party has to stop. And it just didn't. It just continued. And it was a very kind of slippery transition from, yeah, I'm drinking a lot, but we're just celebrating, to now I'm medicating. And I'm just trying to keep that numb feeling so that I don't have to deal with all of these emotions and all this overwhelming stuff. I can remember coming home the day that we came home, and we flew from Cyprus. I think we might have had a couple stops in there, but when we left Cyprus, we flew back to Canada and we landed in Edmonton. They landed us on a runway with a hangar that was separate from the rest of the airport. And they told us, we did some paperwork there, and then we got on a bus and they drove us to the base. And inside this one building, all of our friends and family that were there to meet us were in this building. And I can remember talking about the difficult transition and some of the anxiety. Like, we'd waited 6.5 months to see our friends and family. They waited for us. And I think it was harder on them than it was on us, because, I don't know what my parents went through. I've never sent my children off to war. So I don't know what they felt, but to me, I was fulfilling my dream. So I was very excited to go. But the bus pulled up and they said, "Okay, guys, you can go to see your friends and family. They're waiting for you in the hangar. And we're gonna, so, here's your timings for tomorrow. You have to be at the base for this time to turn in some kit." We did 3 half days and then we were on leave. And I can remember the officer left the bus and nobody moved. Nobody moved at first. And then a couple guys got off, a couple went into the hangar to see their friends and family, but a lot of us didn't. A lot of guys, they had a cigarette first, they sat there, and it was just, I don't know if I just didn't want to admit that it was over. I don't understand what that was, but I was reluctant too. I didn't want to go in that hangar. I didn't want to see, I knew my mom was there. I didn't want to see anybody. I didn't even understand how to go in. And the idea of somebody like crying and hugging me and just telling me how much they love me. And it just, I didn't want that. I didn't want that at all. And I don't know why. But that was just something that we really struggle with. And that anxiety, like, that stayed for a long time.
Did you feel an impulse to, like, go back to Afghanistan when you're having that anxiety? You're on the bus. Were you just like, do you recall feeling like, I don't want to be here, I want to be back there? Or do you remember those feelings?
I don't think it was that yet. I think that came later, but at the time when I'm talking about getting off the bus, I don't know what it was, but it was just, I know there's a lot of emotion in that room. And, we spent a long time being emotionally numb to what's going on around us. And that's important in war. But just switching it off like that and going back to being, a regular person again, it wasn't something that I knew how to do.
Do you remember what it felt like then when you did get off the bus and you saw your mom?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to sound cold, but like, I faked a smile. I faked, anybody that wanted to give me a hug, I gave them a hug, but I didn't want to. I didn't want anybody touching me. I didn't even want to be there. Right. I was so disconnected from everything.
I can't help but feel like you were still in self-protective mode.
Yes.
I cannot be vulnerable to any emotions.
I think it was for a long time. Emotions are dangerous, right? If they're too powerful, then they can get out of control. And then if my emotions are out of control, how can I do my job?
Yeah.
How can I be a soldier if I can't control my emotions? And I think the Army does a really good job of teaching that. But you don't learn how to turn that off. So, the onus is really on the individual to kind of figure out how to reintegrate back to civilian life.
That's a lot. That's no small task.
No, that was the hardest part about all of it. Absolutely, the hardest part was integrating back to civilian life.
Mm-hmm.
I left the military in 2011, so I got back in 2010, and then the next year, February, I was gone.
Mm-hmm.
So I was having trouble. I was still drinking all the time. Like I struggled with alcohol for a while, for years. Um, I was drinking 6 days a week. I was really really struggling, and I thought that I was an alcoholic. What I kind of realized once I eventually got the help that was available for me was that the alcohol wasn't so much the issue. It was what I was using to be the solution, which
Mm-hmm.
is really really wrong.
It was the pain. It was what you were using to treat the symptom of your
Right,
pain, right?
right. And so once I kind of started to sort of get my mental health under control, and the difficulties I was having there, and I had a few strategies and a few coping mechanisms in place, the alcohol wasn't an issue anymore. It kind of faded off.
Mm.
So, but I spent a lot of years. I spent a lot of years in a really really dark place. I didn't feel like I deserved the benefits that were there to help me. I didn't feel like, I had left the fight. Some of my guys went back for a second tour.
Mm.
Some stayed in the military. A lot of guys left, but some stayed. And I felt like I just left them behind.
Mm.
Um, One thing that I'll talk about that's it's hard to share this without sounding crazy. But I'm just gonna say it. I felt like I had squandered an opportunity to avenge the guys who had been killed on our tour. I really, like, I had never felt an anger like that before,
Mm.
as when you lose somebody. And I felt like I owed it to them to find the person that did that to them, and do my job as a soldier. But I never had that opportunity.
Mhm.
I felt like I had missed that opportunity.
You were helpless once you got back to Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. It started even before that, right? It started for me, the changing of my identity as a soldier. It started when I got on the helicopter to leave Afghanistan, because as soon as I was on the helicopter, I knew I was no longer going outside the wire. I was no longer going on any missions or doing any patrols. And so I wouldn't need those rules of engagement anymore, because I wasn't going to be in a position where I would need to use them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I didn't really realize that until years later, but I think that's when it started for me. Was I started to kind of like, okay, well, now I'm still in the military, it's honorable, but I'm not going to do this again.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know why I'm still here. And I
Mm-hmm.
had some family tragedies happen right before I went overseas. And so I was kind of I'd kind of put all that on hold so
Mm-hmm.
that I could go to war.
Mm-hmm. Are you comfortable talking about that? Are you referring
Yeah.
to, yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's okay. A few months before I deployed to Afghanistan, my grandmother passed away. Um, and then my uncle had drowned in his pool.
Oh,
So my family was hurting, and I was hurting, and I had to have a very frank conversation with the base chaplain, because he was thinking about taking me off the tour because of all the tragedies that had happened with my family. And I said, don't do that to me. This
mhm,
is all I've ever wanted. It's not going to bring them back,
mhm,
and it's all I've ever wanted. Don't take this away from me. This is, I waited my whole life for this.
mhm. And that chaplain wields a lot of power on that base, right?
Absolutely. The chaplains have a lot of power. People probably don't realize, but they can give orders that, that have to be followed by everybody, kind of thing. Like, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but they have a lot of power
Mm,
um, to apply like compassionate type help, right?
mhm,
And then when I was overseas, um, my grandfather passed away. And
mm,
this is the same grandfather that I talked about being very, very close to. And I was devastated. I was on leave at the time. I was on my HLTA in Las Vegas with my ex. And I got word that he had passed away, and I had to get special permission to go to the funeral. because the day that his funeral was happening was the same day I was supposed to arrive back in Afghanistan. So I
Mm.
had to get special permission, but I mean, I can't just call Afghanistan. I had to go through, the base, who
Mm.
then had to like send an email to my CO, and then my CO had to like call me on a satellite phone from like the side of a mountain kind of thing. And I was in Vegas, so on my cell phone, and it was a big mess. Eventually, they gave me permission to go, and said it was okay. But I was on a plane. I think the next day, it was like December. I think it was like Christmas Eve, and
Jeez.
I was on a plane back to Afghanistan to start that journey, which is like a long, long trip.
So, like, part of me wants to say, well, at least you got to go to the funeral. That must
Right.
have helped you with a little bit of your healing. But then I'm thinking, you were on your way back to Afghanistan like immediately. So
Yeah.
you didn't have a chance to process any of this
No.
trauma really that you had
No.
experienced over those months,
Right. That's
including the
right.
most significant loss.
That's right. Strangely, and not to sound too dramatic, but like I know my grandfather would have understood that, right? I know that he would have said to me, and this is how he used to talk to me. He used to call me boy all the time because I was the boy. He used to call me the boy, and he would say, "Don't, boy, you got to go over there and help those guys. Your guys are waiting for you. You got to go." I know he would have said something like that.
Mm.
So I took solace in that, but it also meant that I wasn't there for the rest of my family when they were struggling with this as well,
Oh.
because I was deployed. I had a job to do, and I had to go.
So
So
you've got the trauma of, I mean, your own loss, and then the guilt of not being there for your family, and then you go do your tour and you come back and you got the guilt of not being there for your military family. This is
right,
just, it's following you around.
right. And then I had the guilt of the guilt and the regret and the shame of some of the things that had happened on the tour, that like I still think about. Like I think about it every day, and so it's a lot of emotions. It's a lot of collecting collecting traumas, for lack of a better phrase. And then how do you figure all that out? So then I come home and I'm already struggling with alcohol, and I'm trying to figure all that out. Then I leave the military, and now I no longer have an identity. So I
Mm.
don't know who I am after the army. And I
Mm.
didn't put any time into thinking what that was. And I didn't realize at the time that's what it was, but I
Mhm.
was struggling with my identity as a soldier. I was
And that
struggling.
essentially was your identity since you were a little boy, because you always knew that's what you wanted to do. And then you did it, and then it was over.
That's a good point. I think that's probably very true. I think that identity started because I tried to model my values after what I believed was right
Yeah.
and what I had learned from my grandfather, which kind of plays into being a soldier.
Yeah. That's hard when you're peaking, or you're seemingly peaking in your own mind in like your mid 20s, because you
Right.
still have a lot of living to do after that. You need something to work toward. So you left the military, and then, correct me if I'm wrong, but you went back to bouncing in a bar. Is that right?
Yeah, I was doing construction for a little while. I took a construction job, just doing labor. My first, I didn't work for the first 3 months. My old man floated me for a bit to help me out.
Mm.
And then I went back and got a construction job. But again, I felt the same thing I felt before. I was unfulfilled, right?
Mm.
So I went back to bouncing. And this is long before I ever started to kind of really work on myself
Mhm.
and try to re-examine that identity. Um, at the time, I wasn't going to therapy. I wasn't collecting any benefits from Veterans Affairs. I had zero help, because I wasn't willing to talk about it.
Mm.
So
Because as
it's
far as
not
you were
like
concerned, you didn't have physical wounds. So, like,
right.
is that why you felt undeserving of the benefits from? Yeah.
Yeah, very, very common. It's very common with a lot of the veterans that I've spoken to, as well as myself.
Yeah.
It's very common as like, oh, well, maybe things were difficult, but they weren't as bad as they were in 2006. Those guys saw way more combat than I did. So who am I to complain?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of gatekeeping that way. Oh, well, maybe maybe I'm having nightmares all the time and I'm drinking every day, but I didn't lose a leg overseas. That person did. They need the benefits, not me. I'm fine. I'm good. Part of that is not wanting to show weakness. Part of that is the culture, right? The culture of this is my job. And if I can't do my job, maybe I don't belong here. If I can't keep up with everybody else, maybe I don't belong here. And there is definitely a mentality of that. I mean, those types of things, the emotional numbness, that like suck it up attitude, those have a really important place in war, because you have to be able to do your job. You have to be able to help your team, and you have to be able to complete your mission. And you can't do that if you're worrying about your emotions, if you're upset all the time, if you're not able to do the physical requirements of your job, if you're not there for your team, you can't go to war successfully. You can't do that.
Yeah.
So that's fine for that theater. But when you come home, there's no place for that, because your mental health doesn't subscribe to those same rules. And so, you try to approach your mental health with that same mentality, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. So I went back to bouncing. What ended up happening was a friend of mine, a guy that I had served with, came into the bar one night while I was working. And
Wait, was he from Durham region originally?
No. So he's from British Columbia. And he had left Afghanistan before the rest of us, because his contract had ended. So he had gone back home to BC before we had come home from Afghanistan. I don't think I'd seen him when I came home, because I was out fairly quickly as well. So for him to walk into the bar that I was working in Whitby was very strange, like totally out of left field. Like, he walks in and he's like, "Burnsy," and I'm like, "John, what's up, man? Like, what the hell are you doing here?" And he says, "Oh, well, I'm working with Wounded Warriors. We're doing this charity ride across Canada, and one of the directors of Wounded Warriors he was at the time in Whitby." So he starts talking to me, and he just says, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm great." I totally I totally deflected, which is very common as well. And I said, "Oh, I'm great, buddy. I'm working, and yeah, I'm good." And he says, "Okay, but how are you really?" And I don't know if anybody had ever asked me that way. I had friends and family that were very concerned for me, and I realized how concerned they were looking back on it now. And I have a couple of really close friends who tried to inspire me to kind of get some help, and it wasn't the time. But for some reason, when he said it to me, it kind of stuck with me, and it bothered me, right? And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm working here and I'm working there. I'm doing construction. I'm working all over the place." And he says, "Well, like, are you sure you're okay? Like, have you ever really talked to anybody about any of that stuff? Like, it's okay to not be all right with it." And I'm like, "No, I don't need to speak to anybody." Then he said, "You know what, man? Like, I can smell the booze on you right now. Like, you know, you need to figure it out." He said, if you're going to live a poor quality of life, it's because you've chosen not to get the help." And he said, "I got the help, and it's changed my life." And he said, if you want to talk about what other people have done and you want to compare your service to other people, you have to realize these aren't the words he used, Tamara. So I'm gonna I'm gonna change the words so it's a little bit more appropriate.
PG.
But he basically said to me, you can't compare your mental health to somebody else's. It's not the same thing. And you're responsible for what happens with your life. And I think that's what I needed to hear. I didn't act on it right away. It stuck with me, and I just couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. Eventually I met my wife, Jamie, and we started dating, and she asked me very early on in our relationship what I wanted to do, what did I want to be when I finished with bouncing, and what was my future career. And I said, "Well, I want to get into policing. I want to be a police officer." She said, "Well, what are you doing about that? Have you done anything to take those steps? Have you taken any steps towards getting that?" And right away I was thinking, who is she to be telling me what I need to do?
Go, Jamie.
Go Jamie, exactly. Yeah. But again, she had the courage to tell me what I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear. And I reached out to Veterans Affairs. I struggled for a few years trying to navigate the administrative side of it, which I was not an expert at. And I realize now that it was my failing that kind of led to that because I didn't understand how to speak the language. But once I learned that, I got the benefits that I needed. I got the help that I needed, and it totally saved my life.
What was it that you were seeking from Veterans Affairs? Like, Jamie obviously highlighted the fact that you had to get your crap together, right? If you want to make your goals happen. So what made you think, okay, Veterans Affairs, okay, I need some help with this?
Right. So that was the only path that I knew to getting benefits. I knew I couldn't afford this stuff just out of pocket. I wasn't making enough money to afford going to see a doctor every couple of weeks.
Right.
So, I started looking at the website, looking at the programs that were available, all the help that was available for veterans. And it was very overwhelming. I really didn't understand a lot of the stuff. There were certain programs that I was interested in. There were certain programs that would have benefited me if I'd have been able to get over the stigma of asking for them. And then there's other ones that didn't really apply to me, but it didn't really matter. The main thing that I was seeking was support for PTSD. So I wanted them to help me with doctor's appointments that I couldn't afford on my own. And that was really difficult because I truly didn't believe that I was having any trouble at all.
Yeah.
And again, it wasn't until Jamie came along and she started to say, you have like nightmares every single night, right? Like, no, I don't. She said, yeah, you do. And you wake up sweating. And I had had flashbacks before in the past, but I didn't really understand what it was. I truthfully, what it was at the end is I didn't have any faith that it was going to help. I didn't have any faith that it was going to make any kind of a difference. And I remember my first doctor's appointment, I went in to meet with Dr. Gary Chalice. I'll say his name because he helped me a lot. And I sat down with him and I was like, this is what's going on. This is what's wrong. Here's what's happening. Here's all my symptoms. Now, what are you going to do about it? and that was totally just me being defensive and like not being receptive at all to the therapy.
Yeah. You want to fix me? Fix me.
Yeah. You want to fix
try.
me? Go ahead. Good luck to you. Right.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous. And if he's, if he ever listens to this, he's probably going to laugh, but he just had the right approach. He's like, well, it sounds like you've done your homework and you pay close attention to what's going on. And, I think it's positive that you've admitted a lot of this stuff to yourself and you've taken an interest in your own therapy. That's more or less what he said, but he said it in a way that, wasn't accusatory. Yep. It wasn't anything like that. He very much let me come to my own realization about a lot of the stuff, right? Because I was receptive to it. I was not receptive. Sorry. I was interested in exploring it. Yeah. But I still didn't have any faith that it was going to work. It really wasn't until years later when, a couple of years after I started going to him where I said, you know what, I don't think I want to go back. It's not doing anything. And Jamie said, excuse me, what do you mean it's not doing anything? And I said, well, I'm no different than I was 2 years ago. She said, you don't see it, but I see it and your friends see it and your family sees it. It is a huge improvement. You've done a really good job and you need to keep it up. I felt like it was such a slow change. It was such a long road. And I spent so many of those months at the start of the therapy leaving the session feeling way worse than I did when I went in.
Draining,
that it was just, it was just like, I was just stubborn and I was like, you know what? This doesn't feel good, but they say I'm supposed to go. So fine, I'll go. And I was such a child about it, but it did help me. And it got to a point where there was a soldier we lost overseas. And there was a time in my life when I couldn't even say his name. And now I'm able to kind of share those experiences with other people and use them to try to help them out of the place that I was in.
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jeremy. And I've noticed you said years went by many times in this conversation. So your journey was such a long journey, and congratulations on coming out on the other side of it. And I don't know if you're still in that journey, but maybe start telling us a little bit about, your path to policing from there.
Sure. So I got hired in 2018. It took me almost 3 years of applying and testing and interviews. I think I was turned down by 9 services
Wow.
before.
Hey, I just talked to somebody last week who is 13. So,
Wow.
and he's a
Wow.
sergeant now. Your
It's
future
just
is bright.
it's just the consistency, right? It's the person.
Yes.
Like you get it deferred, or you get a rejection letter or whatever it is, or an email, and you just, okay, that's fine. I'll just, okay, more time to get better, right?
Keep going. Good for you.
That's it. Yeah, that's the only way to do it, because so much of that process is out of your control as an applicant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of had to take the bull by the horns again. I had gone back up over the years in weight, so I went from 265 down to 190
Wow.
on the service just before I got hired. And
Wow.
I needed to do that. It was important. I was way too heavy. I was out of shape. I couldn't pass the testing. So I got myself to a place where I could.
Mm-hmm.
When I eventually got hired with TPS, like I felt like I'd won the lottery, right? Because again, this is on my short list of things that I wanted to do with my life.
Mm-hmm.
And what, like, getting on the job, it it kind of I don't know how to say it. Like, after I left the army, I struggled for years, feeling again unfulfilled. But more so than that, I felt like I had squandered the opportunities that were provided to me, right? You know, soldiers greater than me sacrificed their lives so that, I could live, so that and I made it through and they didn't. So I needed to do everything I possibly could to make that sacrifice worthwhile, right? And for the years that I squandered drinking and partying and just getting overweight and not taking care of myself, those were years that I regret, because
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't showing the proper level of respect to the sacrifice that had been made by people other than me. So when I got on the job, I felt like I had achieved something. Like, finally, I'm doing something that I can be proud of. That's maybe at least kind of stepping towards showing respect
Mm-hmm.
for the sacrifices that were made. I don't want to say, like, I shouldn't say for me, like, it just, the sacrifices that were made, the people that don't have the opportunity to have a second career.
Mm-hmm.
The people who, but it was more than that. It was more than just the soldiers. It was their families as well, right? For the husbands and wives who wake up in empty beds. Like, how dare I just drink my life away and drown my sorrows when there's people who are living their worst nightmare. And I'm not there. So I needed to do everything I could to try to kind of make that worthwhile. And I felt like getting on the job was definitely part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was also, again, wearing a uniform, which was huge for my mental health. Believe it or not, carrying a firearm does very positive things for my mental health. I felt useful again. I felt like I was an asset to an organization, as opposed to just being, like a worker. I felt like I was an asset.
You had that piece of your identity back too.
That's exactly what it was. And it's hard not to sound, again, a little bit crazy, but saying that, like, carrying a firearm was part of my identity. But that was one of the things that I missed a lot about the military, was that rifle, that weapon, is a symbol of who I was as a soldier.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just very quickly, my friend Jesse, when I first met him, I was working at the casino. I'd left the construction company and I went to work at the casino in Ajax doing security. And I met my friend Jesse there, and really within the first couple of weeks of knowing him, he invited me out to the range to go shoot some rounds off at the range. And I can remember putting rounds on a target with his rifle and then just setting the rifle down and being like, man, you have no idea how good this feels right now. And it was just, like I said, I can't thank you enough. I'll never forget what you've done for me here. Like all he did was invite me out to the range. He's like, "Ah, you're a cool guy. You like guns. I like guns. You know, let's go hang out for the first time."
Wow.
But it was more than that. It just felt, and it had been like a couple of years since I'd held a firearm.
Yeah.
So getting on the job was a big part of kind of like re-identifying who I am, right? And figuring it out. Once I eventually got on the road after training, I started to go to some radio calls. Not a lot of them, but some of the ones that we were going to were like, wow, this is a really awesome opportunity to help somebody, right? You're helping people every day, but to a greater or lesser degree, depending on the radio call. But this was really a lot of, like, there was a couple of situations where it's like, this person really needed my help, and I'm really happy I was here to help them.
What sorts of situations?
I won't get into too much detail, but I dealt with a pretty graphic domestic assault where a lady had been attacked by her husband, and they were both elderly. But I had an opportunity to really help that person. I mean, I think I was like the first or the second one through the door. And, I was able to, I did first aid on her. She'd been cut with a knife. And so I did first aid on her, and I spent the whole day, I went to the hospital with her. I spent the whole day in the hospital with her, just kind of talking with her, trying to calm her down. And again, it goes back to, those skills that I learned over the years, talking to people in the bars and stuff, where you've got somebody who's extremely upset and you need to find a way to calm them down. That's where I kind of found a lot of value in what I was doing.
Did that just fill up your cup?
Yeah, for sure. Right. That's exactly what it was. That's a good way to describe it. And it filled the cup up, and it's like, I hadn't had an opportunity like that since I left Afghanistan. I wasn't a strong enough person to do it when I first came home, but it was almost that validation too of like, okay, I've now gotten myself to a position of strength again, where I have, like the emotional equity to actually help somebody else. Whereas I wasn't. For years, I wasn't able to help barely even myself. So the job provided me those opportunities by being able to help people, because, it was my job to go.
Where were you? Where were you stationed? Where was your first division?
42 Division in
Okay.
Scarborough. Yeah.
So in Northeast, or North Scarborough.
Yeah.
It's the biggest division in the city, I think. Interesting place for you to get started. So you start doing that, and then where does it go from there? Because you started this conversation by talking about the fact that you haven't been on for very long, and here you are. You're not in 42 Division right now. You're working out of Yorkdale Mall. So how do you go from answering those calls to your current position, which we'll get to?
Right. So my partner Aaron and I met the day that we signed our contracts with TPS. So we were.
This is Constable Aaron Dale.
Yes.
Yep.
PT Aaron Dale. That's right.
Yep.
So Aaron and I were at Toronto Police Headquarters about to sign our contracts after we'd gotten our job offer. And Aaron started a conversation with me because he noticed my tattoos. And he saw the tattoos, and he said, "Hey, were you in the Army?" I said, "Yeah, I was. But I got out in 2011. What about you?" Because usually if somebody's asking me if I'm in the Army, they usually are too. And the fact that he keyed up on my tattoos made me think that he was. He said, "Yeah, I just left." Well, he was technically still in at the time, but he said, I just left CSOR, Special Operations. So him and I hit it off really early on. And
just sitting outside, what was it? The recruiting office? Where do you go to sign your papers?
Yeah, on the second floor there, we were sitting in the chairs outside the recruiting office, just waiting for somebody to tell us what to do. And then they took us into another room to sign, but we started a conversation. We became friends through training. And then after we finished training at the college, I got posted to 42 in Scarborough, and he got posted to 22 down in Etobicoke, the Southwest.
Like,
right?
literally complete
opposite
opposite ends
sides.
of
Yeah.
the city. 22 Southwest South Etobicoke, 42 North Scarborough. Okay.
Couldn't be farther away, right?
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is because we were such new guys, going to a radio call, we're always looking up the procedure. If there's an opportunity to look it up before we get there, if it's
Yeah.
not like a super hot call, then there's a chance maybe to like look it up on the computer, to look through the procedure and kind of see what's expected of us and what we need to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So early on, and very separately, Aaron and I both start running into other military veterans on radio calls, and some of them are, they have wives or husbands, they have jobs, they work, they have a house, whatever, but they needed a little extra help. And some of them were homeless, dealing with mental health difficulties, dealing with alcoholism and addictions issues. And so we start looking up the procedure to help them, and we found out that there wasn't one. So I have friends on different services all over the place that I'm still really close with. And I reached out to them and I said, "Hey, what do you guys do in your service to help veterans, like in terms of like procedurally, not the odd guy here and there that's doing something, but procedurally, what do you have?" And the answer was nothing. We were hoping to find a program that we could use as a template to try and bring something to Toronto. So Aaron and I, he calls me up one day. He's like, "Hey man, you got a minute to chat? I have an idea." And I said, "That's kind of funny. I got something I want to run by you too. I have an idea too." And we almost had the same idea, kind of around the same time. So
Had you guys had been talking to each other about running into veterans and not
yeah,
knowing what to do?
we have, yeah. And because we kept in touch once we hit the road, right? Even though we were at opposite ends of the city, and we didn't live anywhere nearby each other, we were still friends. And so, we would share funny stories, or, hey, he would call me up and be like, "What do you think about this call here? Like, what do you want? How did you handle this when you had it," kind of thing. And we would bounce ideas off of each other. But we had both very separately experienced veterans, and just like we knew what was available to help them because we went through the process ourselves. But the problem is a lot of veterans don't know what's available to help them. And then there's the added stigmas of them not feeling like they've earned the benefits that are there. And like I kind of talked about myself, that's a very common kind of standpoint.
Yeah.
So we Aaron wrote up a business proposal and we submitted it to Inspector Tim Crone down at 22, who at the time was Aaron's unit commander. And Inspector Crone was a huge help, and he mentored us very early on through the process. He said, "This is a good idea. Let's get this going. Let's you guys want to put something together, put together a presentation." He eventually set up a meeting with Staff Superintendent Barkley and Yandel at the time. And so we
And was Staff
presented to them.
Superintendent Mark Barkley like in your neck of the woods at that time? Because he was overseeing 4 district at some point around there, wasn't he? Or was he at headquarters?
We met him in his office at headquarters.
Oh,
So I
okay.
think he was at HQ by then. Yeah.
Okay.
But it was intimidating. It's two very junior officers in front of 2 staff superintendents, an inspector. There was other people there too. And it's like, okay, well, I don't know anything about being a cop, but I know that this program is necessary, and I know about being a veteran. So, okay, let's go with this. Anyway, so
wait. So just talk to me about that for a second, because I can only imagine how intimidating it must have been. But that humility that you brought to it by saying, "I don't know anything about being a cop. I know I'm new." How do you think that helped you?
It showed that we didn't go in there thinking we knew everything. I think that there was definitely, there is like, I don't know how they felt, but I know if I was in their position, I would have been like, "Who's this young cop coming in here thinking he's going to tell us how it's done?" Right. But they didn't do that. They were very receptive. They were very open. And so we said right off the bat, and I think I opened with, "Hey, thank you so much for having us, but I think there's more vacation time in this room than we have on the job. We've been cops for about 12 minutes. So thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to listen to what we have to say." We ended up presenting to them twice. They were very supportive. And then from there, we worked on it a little bit more in our off time. And we eventually got in front of Chief Raymer. and Deputy Chief Shauna Coxon when she was with TPS,
Mm-hmm.
and they were both extremely receptive. And they said, "Okay, well, what do you need?" He said, "Well, we built partnerships with Veterans Affairs Canada, the Royal Canadian Legion, and the Operational Stress Injury Social Support, and we need a full-time position doing this because it's getting a little bit too big for us to manage."
Yeah. So wait, what were you doing at that point? You guys were still in the cars?
Yeah, we were both still in the cars. Yeah. So
And you had built these partnerships with all these different agencies. And what were you doing? Like, were you, when you would come across a veteran, then you would call somebody, or what did it look like at this point?
So at the time, the only way to really get them to those agencies was to have them call. So the problem with that was that those hours are Monday to Friday, right? So if I have a veteran who's in crisis on a Saturday night at 3 a.m., they've got to wait until, there is some stuff available we know now, but at the time we didn't know that. We didn't know if there was anything available for them, right? There's Veterans Affairs has a 1-800 number that you can call to get free psychological sessions, 20 of them a year. But we didn't know any of that. So it really was getting everybody to the table, the partners, and it really was getting to the table to talk about what's available, to talk about how this process was going to work. But they had never worked, a lot of them, with the police before. So this was new ground for everybody. And it took a long time to kind of like build up how this was going to work, while at the same time protecting the veterans' privacy and consent.
Right, right. Okay, so then you went to the people who had more vacation time than you guys had on the job. You said we need full-time spots. What did you get from that? Where did you go from there?
So they created a position with Community Partnerships and Engagement Unit for the program to live, and they created a program coordinator position for one of us at the time. So Aaron came here for the first year and a half, and then I got here just this last April last year.
Right.
And so since then, we've further built up the partnerships. We designed and implemented a referral form that officers can use in off hours, outside of business hours, to get a veteran in crisis, or if it's an emergent situation, they can get them a little bit more of a streamlined process to Veterans Affairs. The partners have agreed to reach out within 72 hours of receiving this form, and we've done 28 referrals. That's 28 veterans that we've helped.
Wow.
This program also works for officers who had served on international policing operations, RCMP members, anybody who are Canada's wartime allies, as well as international veterans, and also a veteran's family members can be a part of this.
Wow.
They can get signed up by the police.
So it's basically just it's easing the burden of them having to figure out what to do. It's streamlining that process.
Absolutely. Yep.
Wow. So you've created this for Toronto Police, but as you said, I don't remember if you said it during this conversation or the previous conversation we were having off air, but you talked to a lot of different police services. What are you guys doing now?
So right now we're doing a lot of this type of stuff, podcasts, global news to the story on the program, which was very helpful. We're trying to get the word out right now that this is available, and it's available right now. So we created a CPKN training program, which teaches officers de-escalation techniques, a little bit about mental health, a little bit about military culture.
CPKN? What is that? What does that
Canadian
stand for?
Police Knowledge Network. So it's an e-learning forum that's online.
Right.
And it's available to anybody that wants to take it, and the course is free.
Okay.
So we basically, my job now is I'm training internally. I'm doing presentations to let TPS officers know that this is available. And I'm also liaising with outside agencies who are interested in bringing this to their own service. I have somewhere in the vicinity of 35 services now across Canada that have reached out to me to say, I want to bring this to my service. I think this is really important. And so there's a lot of that. So right now, what we're trying to do is push our program across the entire country.
Wow. And you've got, and do you have officers from your own service? I know you said you're doing training and everything, but I imagine you must get a lot of calls from officers on the road who are encountering these veterans. Like, what sorts of stories are you hearing from the road?
We had officers down in I think it was 22 Division that literally talked a veteran out of a noose, a veteran who was trying to hang himself, trying to commit suicide, and they talked him out of a noose. And they knew that there was something available, so they contacted us, and we got that veteran referred off to the social service agencies. And I mean, there's so much available to help them. but people don't know what's available. And so they can't ask for it if they don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But, we're hearing stories like that. I met with an officer down in 43 Division, and we met with a 72-year-old veteran who'd been homeless for 30 years and didn't know what was available. I filled out the referral form with him. It took me 5 minutes. The Royal Canadian Legion sent somebody down to offer support. And from what I understand, that person has a permanent place to live now.
Amazing. Wow, Jeremy, congratulations.
Thanks a lot.
What honor you are continuing to serve with. Your grandfather would be so proud. And like, I am swelling with pride for you. And this is like the third time that we've spoken. This is an incredible, incredible program. So when you're talking to officers, because as you know, as I can imagine, nobody can understand what you veterans have gone through except for perhaps other veterans, right? So
Right.
when you're telling police officers, when you're training them, is there one main piece of advice that you give them to give them that insight into the veteran's experience? Is it all about, giving that validation that your suffering is valid, your suffering matters? Is it like, is there one thing or 5 things that you point to get police officers? I mean, I don't think there would be any struggle in getting them on board, but to help them understand to the point that they're able to help, because not all these police officers are veterans.
For sure. It's a difficult, if I'm talking to a police officer who never served in the military, there's so much to share, right? There's so much to share that could possibly help them. I think we do a good job in the training of covering a lot of that. However, just understanding that there's so many stigmas to why a veteran may not want to receive help. And they're like, no matter how good your intentions are as an officer or how good the program may or may not be, you might get pushed back regardless. You might get pushed back from a veteran who just says, forget it. I'm not accepting any help. I don't need help.
I'm thinking about you standing in that bar in Whitby when your buddy from BC shows up.
A lot of it is tied into their identity,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of it is tied into, regret and shame, and understand that I think understand that the problem is infinitely more complex than a lot of people realize, right? Because there's so many emotions tied into it. And I mean, it can be a long road, a long process. And what I've said to people, veterans that I've spoken to, is, I'm not saying it's because they talk about the administration fatigue. They talk about, I don't want to deal with Veterans Affairs. I've tried a couple times and failed. And what I always just say to them is, I'm not promising you it's going to be easy. I'm promising you it's going to be worth it. And I'm promising you that whatever quality of life you're leading now, it can be better. It can be better. And when your car breaks down, I can fix I can change a tire. I can put gas in my car if it's out of gas. But if there's a problem with my engine, I need to go to a mechanic. And I think we have to really highlight that, although like peer support is very, very important, it's a huge part of what our program is. Sometimes you need more than just a friendly ear. Sometimes you need a professional. And when you're having those difficulties, you need to reach out for professional help. To say to the officers, it's a little difficult. But I would just say, be that empathetic person. Use your techniques, use your skills that you use every single day, building a rapport with people that we talk to on radio calls, and just understand that if you've never served, you may not understand fully where that person's coming from, but it doesn't mean that you're ineffective. It doesn't mean that you can't listen. We have unique opportunities as officers every single day to change people's lives, and don't underestimate how valuable you are to that person. You might be the first person that they've ever opened up to and spoken to.
Jeremy, I think I've mentioned to you before that so many of these TPS trust conversations I've had, inevitably, we end up talking about the mental stressors of the job. And what you're describing from the veteran community, I can't help but feel that so many police officers would be able to relate to that when we're talking about PTSD, when we're talking about, the difficulty in having a very stressful shift, or, many trauma calls in one shift, and then having to go home and play that different role and take off that uniform. And listening to you speak about this veterans program, I can't help but feel that even just offering this training to non-veteran police officers must be helping some of them too. Do you feel that in the training that you do?
100%. I think when we started designing it, we didn't really consider that. But now that I've been a part of both communities, there's a lot of crossover between the military community and the law enforcement community, right? And so by teaching officers about veteran mental health issues and, other emotional issues that veterans experience, we're probably a lot of officers are probably going to see some common themes
Mm-hmm.
and recognize a few of those traits in themselves. And that's, I'm hoping that they do and realize that it's even if the reasons that got us to where we are different, war versus trauma out on a radio call,
Mm-hmm.
it's still trauma. And you still have a responsibility, I think, to yourself and your family to try to take care of those situations before they get out of control.
I love that. I mean, it's a weird thing to say. I love that too, but the idea that it's still trauma because it's still that same impact on the brain,
Yep.
and it's still, it impacts the way that you respond to situations. Can you tell me about that tattoo that we keep saying when you go and touch your nose? Show me your hand if you're comfortable doing so. And can you tell me?
Yeah, it's going to be kind of hard to see. It's a little washed out with the light. On the top of my hand here, I have "None Unbroken by War" tattooed, as well as my regimental cipher for the PPCLI. And then over just on my thumb here, I have Roman numerals for the 14 guys that we lost on our tour.
Mm.
So
And
it's just a reminder for me. I look down every day and I see it. It's a reminder for me that I have to keep my stuff together. I have to work really hard and make sure that I'm trying to do something to help the community, the veteran community, every day.
yeah. And on your right hand, you have honor. Is that right?
Yeah, it's Latin and it means honor. It's a little bit rough. That one needs a little work.
I hope that you can feel the impact of I think you've illustrated it pretty well that you can feel the impact, but you are making an impact in the serving with honor that you're doing now. Jeremy, is there anything else that you would like anybody watching this to know about yourself, about your fellow police officers, your fellow veterans, or policing or military service in general that we haven't already discussed?
Yeah, there is actually. What I want to highlight is that this absolutely took a village. Thank you for the compliment, about the hard work that we did with the program. It was a ton of work. It was a lot of conversations and work in off hours and stuff like that. But it took an entire village. It took experts from, it took experts and professionals from every unit we have in Toronto Police to help us out. We had individuals help us out who offered advice. We had tremendous support from the Toronto Police Military Veterans Association and President Gidlow. We had a lot of help from TPS Legal, a lot of help from Ashling Murphy at Corporate Communications. Like, just these are people who helped us navigate this process. And Aaron and I had big ideas and no clue how to execute them. So it was really helpful that we had a lot of early on support and mentorship from Ishmael Musa and Tim Crone and staff supers Yandel and Barkley. My boss, Brian Smith, who you met earlier, he's been a huge help helping me navigate this office environment that I'm not used to. And I've had tremendous support also from Superintendent Papazuski, who's my boss here at Community Partnerships. I think, and this is kind of funny, but I think Aaron and I are hard people to manage. I think we have big ideas, and when you have somebody with a lot of passion, it's maybe a struggle. I'm maybe speculating a bit, but
I'm the same way. My passion has gotten me into a lot of trouble, but your humility, I think, I don't want to say it offsets that passion. It doesn't offset it, but it's the perfect combination. You guys you go in there saying you don't know everything, but you've got this great idea. You've got the passion. What more could a police service ask for?
Dr. Peter Collins, Dr. Genevieve Boudreau, Dr. Allison Dale. These are people that helped us do stuff that we can't do ourselves. And this really did take a team of experts but everybody who helped us, I think every single person who helped us with this did so because it was the right thing to do. They did so because they see the value in this. And I've met a lot of officers since I started this that have said, you know, I wish I had something like this 20 years ago, because I remember this veteran and that veteran who I met on a radio call, and I just had no clue how to help them. And I wish I'd had this program so that I could have gotten them the help. And they, like, you're talking officers that have been on for 20, 30 years, and they still remember that person that they tried to help or whatever, or that person who's in deep. I've done, you know, I've had interactions with serving members of Toronto Police who I've referred. I've had officers reaching out for me all over the place, veterans reaching out over the internet, and like, it's catching fire. It's doing really, really well. It's really being pushed by the right people in the right places, but it needs more work. It needs to be across the entire country. That's what it needs to be. We need to have a response to what happens when a veteran needs help. And like, just to my community, like, there was a point in my life where I didn't want to live anymore. There was a time in my life when I didn't want to take another breath of air, because it hurt so much to feel the shame and the guilt that I had perceived that I had let people down. And I didn't go down that road, because I just couldn't stop thinking about the people who had sacrificed everything for me. And so when you get to those dark places, just know that life can be better. It doesn't need to be a dark, terrible, emotionless, numb place. There's happiness in the world. There's things you can do to get yourself back on your feet, but sometimes it's just going to take the fortitude to ask for help from a professional. And that's the only way that I got where I was, and from the support of my family.
Life can be better. There is happiness, and you deserve the better, and you deserve the happiness.
Absolutely.
Jeremy, who would have thought that you'd be able to fill your cup so many times sitting behind a desk in a desk job? I'm so happy for you and your journey, and that you are able to serve so honorably in a way. Like, who would have thought that your path would have brought you to this place when you were a little boy listening to your grandfather? But you, in some sense, you have followed exactly the path that you had planned on, and in other sense, I imagine it looks very different. But what a wonderful place that you're in, and just thank you for sharing your story with us. I hate to use the word, what an inspiring person, because I know that that's not always received in the way that it's intended, you know, but thank you for your inspiration, and thank you for your service then and now. And in the future, I know there's so much more to come from you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.